Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Happy 2025. My name is Dave. This guy sitting over here is Vlad. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you have been with us in the last 191 episodes, welcome back. Vlad and I are super excited to kick off 2025, tell you guys a little bit about the plans that we have, some of the plans and updates that we are planning to do business-wise, and hopefully we're going to be able to take you guys along with us a little bit more in 2025 than we have in the past. And then Vlad honestly has this slightly crazy idea of the state of manufacturing and the most granular thing that we have ever built out. So as I told him as he was writing it out and I looked at it, Vlad, I am both excited and absolutely terrified, and you will be the first sacrificial lamb when we go starting to ask those questions. But everyone, without further ado, officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Again, happy 2025. This is episode 192. My name is Dave Griffith, and I am joined by my co-host, Vlad Romanoff. Vlad, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Thank you
Beautiful.
for the introduction, Dave.
That was beautiful, Vlad. We can see
justice.
the energy that you are bringing for us today.
But no, very happy to kick off, the podcast this year. I think we are more ambitious than ever in some of the endeavors that we're tackling, both on the podcast side, but also on the work side. So I think it's going to be a really exciting year. Obviously, we're going to share a couple of those things today. But if you have any thoughts, questions, suggestions, or maybe ideas for us to explore that we have not considered, always open to those conversations as well. I know that we know quite a few groups in the manufacturing and especially in the industrial automation space. So happy to talk about some of the initiatives that maybe you're working on. Yeah. So I guess I'll kick us off maybe with what we're doing for 2025, Dave. So the first
Absolutely.
thing, so the first thing that I guess we want to discuss is the podcast, right? So I think the podcast has fallen into the format that we really like, which is that we typically have a monthly theme. And so the theme consists of, or can be a topic that is fairly high level. So something like IIoT, Industry 4.0, or it could be a little bit more granular, focused on a technology. It could be focused on robotics, ERP systems, SCADA systems, MES, and what have you. So again, if you're not familiar with the format, every month we have a different theme. And I say, and maybe monthly is a bit of an air quote because obviously we also have some shows that will be from a live event or or a commitment that we've made. So the themes don't always fall between the 1st and the 30th or the 31st of a specific month. We do have a schedule together with Dave. We obviously share that schedule and align some of it with the guests and the sponsors, but ultimately you will see the different themes come out throughout the year as the year goes by. And it's not 12 themes, it's a little bit less. We also want to have some breathing rooms. We want to be able to have a couple of episodes that are, let's call it ad hoc, or where Dave and I bring in a guest that is out of theme to be able to discuss maybe a specific topic that is relevant to some of the events that are happening, or maybe a major industry, whether that's a catastrophe, acquisition, or otherwise. Um, so that's the podcast theme plan for 2025 in a general sense. In terms of themes, I think I've covered a couple of them, but we do want to hit on some new ones, such as maintenance. I think maintenance we've discussed in quite a bit of detail on the backstage side. So we want to bring in some interesting guests on the maintenance side. We want to bring in some interesting guests on the ERP side. Again, we've had some sporadic episodes on both of those, but we will be focusing a couple of months on them as well. Any comments before we talk about events and trade shows, Dave?
No, I would say on my side, Vlad, I'm super excited for the first quarter of themes that we have coming up. I feel like as we go and look at it on the modern maintenance practices side, on the ERP side, as well as on the like upskilling and training side, there are conversations that you and I have fairly regularly to different pieces with guests. And so I'm super excited to go put longer conversations together with those focused on on the topics. And I'm super excited to go have everyone come listen and let us know what they think. I hope they're as excited for some of these themes as we are. For us, 2025 is going to be a combination of some of our favorite themes like robotics, like systems integration, like manufacturing intelligence, but then we're also going to go add in and kind of expand on other conversations like the training and upskilling, like the modern maintenance practices, like the ERP. And I think we've got a couple of others in there that Vlad and I kind of set back and we're like, hey, we really want to go through the process of making sure that we can dig deeper in here, because at the end of the day, we want to bring fun, interesting conversations with different topics. If we just wanted to be the same show that talked about the same 12 topics every week or every month, we could do that. And 200 episodes when we started out, that was not the goal. And so we're going to go push beyond some of the conversations that we have been having in the past, and super excited to go expand into that. We have a shockingly full list of events and trade shows, Vlad. And every time we look at it, and I'm like, I feel like this is semi-manageable. Vlad's like, oh, I've got this one, or hey, I'm speaking at this one, or what do you think about this? And at some point I look and I'm like, well, if we wanted to do 2 trade shows a month, every month for the entire year, we could absolutely do that. So Vlad and I will not be producing content at nearly as many trade shows as you guys see some other content creators posting on, but we'll be at a number of them. Vlad, do you have any highlights, first quarter or otherwise, that you want to highlight for the listeners?
Well, in the first quarter, you have the Prove It conference, right, which is going
Mm-hmm.
to be in mid-February in Texas. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be, well, first of all, I think it's a very interesting concept, which I've been, I think, pushing for many, I don't want to say years, right, but for many months at least, where I think people want to see something concrete being made.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm definitely very curious. There's a very long list of sponsors that will be building solutions for
Mm-hmm.
that specific conference. And so Dave and I will be obviously interviewing some of the companies that are building those solutions, what their perspective is, what are some of the innovations I guess they've had to use, what does the architecture look like. So I think we have a lot of technical information that will come out of that conference. um, Obviously, I think it's too early to tell how successful or how competitive some of the
Mm-hmm.
solutions are going to be, but I think again, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be in different layers of the stack as well, right? So some of them are
Mm-hmm.
bringing cloud solutions, of them are bringing sort of ERP, MES, SCADA solutions. Are bringing hardware, some are bringing software. So we'll see
Mm-hmm.
where it all lands in mid February for the Prove It conference out of Dallas, Texas.
Absolutely. And I will agree. I think our first comments back and forth, Vlad, is that we're super excited. I always love to see what people build, and I feel like lots of the time it's really hard and or impossible to go showcase a lot of what you've built for clients. And so forcing everyone who shows up as a sponsor to come go build something, some sort of solution, and being able to have, I don't know, basically the entire world sit there and say, hey, you guys did a great job, or hey, we need to go, maybe we don't like this, or hey, you guys could have done these things differently. I think that in and of itself is super exciting. And so I'm happy to go be there. I'm happy and excited for some of the conversations that we are already planning to have. And you guys should absolutely stick around if you want Vlad and my opinion on some of it and some behind the scenes and other items. I believe we're going to get like functional specs and other things that over the course of the next, well, less than a month, because I think it starts in a month, Vlad and I will be we'll be chatting about and discussing and going and walking through to see what is going on, give kind of our initial thoughts on those topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, it's important to appreciate, and you and I know this very well because we've
Mm-hmm.
attempted, well, I guess we've done multiple, live builds. And so although I would assume there's not going to be any live builds per se, a lot of prep work goes into building out a technical solution that
Mm-hmm.
not only fits your own narrative, but also is able to plug into a system that has been built by a different team. So it certainly requires a team. It certainly requires a lot more. time and effort,
Hmm.
than you and I, Dave, have been able to commit in the past to that sort of an endeavor, right? So now you're wrangling multiple companies, multiple sponsors, like I said, from different layers of the stack. So I am very
Hmm.
interested to see what comes out of it. In terms of, I guess,
Absolutely.
like moving, go ahead, go ahead.
I was going to say, I imagine all of these groups will have at minimum hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours, into these demonstrations. So I think it'll be super exciting to see. I imagine that we'll have a number that absolutely blow everyone away. And it'll be very interesting because you get to stack everyone up and in your mind or on your piece of paper, go rate the ones who you think did the best versus the ones who you think didn't do the best. And I think that in and of itself, I don't know if it's the competitive nature or whatever it is, that adds another layer of excitement and enjoyment. And some of the people that I've talked to who I know are going in part because they get to go see that.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, I guess, like moving down the list, I don't have it in a chronological order, even though we could probably put up a. Actually, let me add a quick filter, and I'm going to order it from um, A
Are
to
you
Z.
talking about trade shows, Vlad?
Yes, still on the trade
Okay.
show side. So I
Yeah,
just
so
wanted
I
to
would
list.
say we
Go ahead.
do in fact have a chronological list. I'm pretty sure you put it together. I'll go ahead and read kind of
Well, I
the
just
first 10.
ordered it, but
Oh,
yes,
okay.
it was not ordered
Then
by.
please, you go ahead, Vlad.
Sure. So we have Prove It, as we mentioned, coming out in February. And some of these conferences, I do want to put a disclaimer. We're still not confirmed for, but happy to chat anyone who's interested in talking to us about them. So, anyways, Hanover Messe, that's going to be in Hanover, Germany, March 31st, April 4th. Advanced Automation Forum out of Boston, Massachusetts, 30th of April. Automate, 12th of May, Detroit, Michigan. Realize Live, 2nd of June, out of Detroit, Michigan. OT SCADACon, 23rd of July, Houston, Texas. ICC, or the Ignition Community Conference, 16th of September, out of Sacramento, California. Pack Expo, Las Vegas, out of Las Vegas, Nevada, 29th of September. Automation Fair, Chicago, 18th of November 2025. And SPS Nuremberg, out of Nuremberg, Germany, 25th of November
Mhm.
2025. And like I said, we may or may not be at all of those conferences. Dave and I have had this conversation many times. I think our conclusion has always been quality over quantity. So we will be having conversations with the different groups who organize these trade shows in order to confirm our attendance. And obviously, once we do have that confirmation, we will be releasing a post on Manufacturing Hub, but also on our own channels on LinkedIn to confirm with whoever wants to shake hands, discuss opportunities, and other things. Thoughts, comments, concerns, Dave?
No, overall, I'm super excited about this. Vlad, you've done something to our spreadsheet, and you've in fact broken all of the logic in it. So congratulations. That will be that'll be someone's Control Z at some point after the show. But no, I'm excited about that. I do want to point out that you and I are confirmed and are fully planning to attend Automate again this year in Detroit. I know you and I have had a lot of fun each of the last couple of years that you and I have been there. And so you and I will absolutely be there. So if you guys are planning to be at Automate, then we will also be there. Yeah, we will also be there with you guys. And then I think beyond that, we will have to see, and we'll absolutely go ahead and let everyone know what shows look like as they are coming up and as we confirm and kind of to what level of involvement we are confirming in. I know Vlad and I are both committed to maybe doing more shows, but not necessarily producing as much content as you guys always see. I feel like on the shows that we go to produce content, they're awesome, but we produce almost only content and don't get to do some of the other things that we enjoy to do. So on some of them, you'll just get more of a backstage, behind the scenes, what is going on in these conversations beyond just the all of the set conversations and set shows that we put together.
Yeah. All right. So I think that is a good wrap for the events and trade shows Dave, what are your plans, maybe work wise, opportunity wise, contract wise? Obviously, as much as you can share for 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. So I imagine, as I think I told everyone last year, for me in 2025, I plan on significantly expanding the ignition practice that I have been building slash rebuilding for the last 6-ish years of Kaplan. We've done a fair amount of ignition work, some of it super publicly, some of it less than publicly, all the way from kind of systems architecture or strategy and then systems architecture. That is what I was doing 5 or 6 years ago. And then probably around 3.5 or 4 years ago, we started doing more of the development. We did a fair amount of development each of the last couple of years. And I imagine that we will double or triple or quadruple what we did last year, this year in 2025, given everything that we have going on. And so I would say for me, that is one of the big ones. The team and I are working on rolling out what will be our ignition framework. We're going to build it on ignition 8.3, which will probably be out, I don't know, end of Q1 or thereabouts. That's what we're banking on. And so we will have some building and a bunch of rebuilding to do in order to get all of that up and running, in order to go leverage all of the past experience and all of the new tools on that. With that, we've got a project, a packaging line that we are going to go roll our framework out to. And while it won't be quite as open or cool as Benson and Optos, everyone can go in and press and go make the windmills spin and the lights turn on and off. It will be fairly open and public, and we will not necessarily take you guys along the way as we do it, but we'll be there to go ahead and showcase what that looks like, maybe on site for a show, and we can go show you what we're doing. A lot of it'll depend what we are packaging. I would say beyond that, a lot of the work that I've historically done, going to continue to do that work. Some of it on the operational side, some of it on the operational technology side. That is very much where I find the most interesting opportunities. I'll be on the road in a couple of weeks. Probably at a random hotel room, which is not necessarily so random for viewers of this show if you're watching it live with the things behind me. But I'll be in a hotel room as I am going to go spend a day on site with a potential client to go figure out how we can map out some of the higher level solutions in order to go drive it into the operational outcomes and needs that they have. That is maybe something that we can talk about. Assuming we win it, assuming it goes well, that's something we can maybe talk about end of the year or at some point in 2026. A lot of that will be really dependent. And then for us, it's very much along the lines of there's lots of opportunities. We are always looking for opportunities. I'm always looking for kind of those interesting projects, especially projects that we can go build something and replicate it a number of times. It's very much for us a concept of how can we go deploy at scale, and how can we go down that path of solving all of these solutions. Those sort of problems are certainly problems that make it to the top of the list. Everything else are solutions that have been done in the past. And there are other people who are good at doing those solutions. And so we're certainly looking for more novel, interesting solutions to go spend the development time and hours and everything else to go deploy.
Interesting. Very interesting. Scalability is a challenge of its own, I would say. But no, that's awesome. I think that there's definitely a lot of work involved in what you're describing. A lot of people involved, a lot of questions. But I think as we'll get to maybe in the last section of this conversation, a lot of opportunities that I certainly see in what you're describing as well for manufacturers. Um, on my side, I guess the three main pillars remain as I've always described them. Right, so through Joltech, I'm obviously looking to do more and am doing more consulting type of work and integration type of work. So going to manufacturers, identifying their operational excellence problems, primarily on the technical side, but obviously on the personnel side as well. Solus PLC, doing a lot of training both online, virtually, or in person. And then, of course, I've done a lot of marketing or content, if you want to call it. So, still creating and helping a couple of different groups on the sales and marketing strategy sides. So, continuing to do more of those three pillars, like I said, under slightly different names depending on what the opportunity is. But again, servicing primarily large manufacturers and some integrators who are looking for that type of work. So
That's awesome, Vlad.
2025
I
is
want to
going to be
I want
interesting.
to ask you about a specific question. So,
Tell me.
for all of the listeners out here, I don't know if Vlad and I have ever necessarily had this type of conversation, but Vlad, I don't know, for the last year and a half or 2 years, has talked fairly incessantly about newsletters. He's like, "Hey, what do you think newsletters are? What sort of opportunity do you think for newsletters?" So, how do I want to say? I feel like one of the things that we haven't necessarily discussed is the newsletter that you have been building and launching at a extremely regular pace on the Solus PLC side. So can we give everyone the plug for the Solus PLC newsletter that you've spent all those hours working and building up?
Sure, and I guess let me take a quick step back, right? So, for context purposes, I think that newsletters are incredibly helpful if they are done right. And this has been proven time and time again in different industries, I would say primarily in tech or software and or business, right? So the newsletters there obviously have a very wide reach to a highly specific audience. In our space, right, when I say in our space, I mainly mean manufacturing and industrial automation. It seems that there's still a lot of print media that is transitioning to the digital form. Some of it is more successful than other, right? In my opinion, is that it can certainly be done a lot better. And I've made those comments, in the past. If you go through my post history, you can certainly find some examples where I think it's quite frankly, just lazy content, right? And so this brings me maybe to what Solus PLC has done, which is, we curate manually. We don't use ChatGPT or bots or anything else to just scrape content and send it to your inbox. We want to use highly technical information that we've either already published or we found, through the news articles that are credible and interesting. And so I think that, to your question on the newsletters, I think it's just a different format. As long as the content adds value to whomever is consuming it, it's definitely a positive. And so on the Solus PLC side, we are over 30,000 subscribers with an open rate. Don't quote me exactly on that, but it's last time I checked was around 32%, which is fairly, or I guess very good for a publication of that size,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the fact that it is a niche publication, right? It is not an audience that is just, let's say, business in general. It is highly qualified individuals because it adds value. So on that side, and again, I'm sharing this a little bit, we are looking for some sponsorships because ultimately, to create good content, it requires a lot of effort, time, and or resources. And to be quite honest with you, Dave, it's how to say it. Thus far, has been an effort purely to how to say it, expose the interesting information. But we're
Mm-hmm.
looking to find some partners with whom we've already talked to late last year and early this year to see if they could contribute in a meaningful way to the information. Right, we're extremely selective. It's not going to be just sending random information to from these groups, but we want the right partners to help us on the Solus PLC newsletter.
No,
And
absolutely.
you,
And we were talking about it, and so I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of all the work that you've done. I feel like, at least on my side, there was a period of time where we talked about newsletters, and then you're like just offhandedly, "Oh yes, this 30,000 subscriber newsletter that I have and have been running successfully for all this period of time." So I think that was interesting and absolutely worth kind of bringing up. We will throw in the chat and in the show notes where you guys can go sign up for the Solos PLC newsletter if you guys would like. And that's more on the technical side, or only on the technical side. So a bit different than the show, correct?
Yeah, so I like to, and I guess maybe this is a purely like Vlad thing, right? But when I sign up to a technical newsletter, if it's let's say on the software side, I like to get what I signed up for from that newsletter, right? If I start receiving things that are maybe too far outside of what I was looking for, then I typically unsubscribe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I want Solus PLC to continue to be is a highly technical resource for engineers, technicians, and managers who are looking to learn some of the tools available in industrial automation. And if you're looking for more leadership type of content, again, we have the podcast. I know we've discussed to maybe putting a newsletter together, but I believe there's other resources for that type of information. So you will not be receiving maybe like leadership or decision making type of news and or tips from the Solus PLC newsletter. At least not for the time being. And if we ever do, that's going to be, like I said, a separate publication.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool enough. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Vlad. I wanted to go put that on everyone's radar. Any other plans for 2025 worth discussing at the moment until we jump into your expecting what should we expect to see in manufacturing in 2025 topic?
No, look, I think it's enough plans, at least on my side. I think, if anything, I'm looking to maybe consolidate some of those ideas and maybe refine the list throughout the year. I think it's important to try new and different things, but ultimately, it's also important to sometimes be able to shut down initiatives that are not working or that are maybe not aligned with what you would like to do more of. So I think, if anything, my comment is, I will be doubling down on things that work and
Mhm.
canceling some of the stuff that doesn't.
No, I think that's awesome, and I'm excited. I think we'll probably have a check-in mid-year, somewhere in there. I'd love to hear what
Yep.
is working well for you, what is working less well for you, especially because you are kind of back in the full-time running your own consultancy. With 2025 being the first year in probably 2 or 3 years that this is what you are doing full-time or mostly full-time at this point. So I'm excited to hear what's working well, what's not working well, as much as we can discuss with the listeners. So, Vlad, you have given us this list. You have titled it State of Manufacturing, what we're seeing / expect to see in 2025. And you're kicking us off with finance and accounting. What are you thinking, Vlad?
So once again, let me maybe take a quick step back. I think that our audience knows to a certain extent that both you and I spend a lot of time in conversations that are, I want to say, in manufacturing, in industrial automation, but ultimately you also get to talk with individuals who are not specifically just dealing with the technologies,
Mhm.
but are also dealing with questions and challenges in other areas of manufacturing, systems integration, and industrial automation. So I wanted to approach this a little bit differently than just asking you, what kind of challenges are you seeing and what kind of opportunities you're seeing, and maybe break it down in terms of functions of an organization, right? So the first one on the list is finance and accounting, which is a typical department you would see in any organization, big or small. And I think for me, the question is ultimately, are we seeing more investments going into industrial automation? Are we seeing more investments going into hiring, right? So it's not necessarily to structure it as what is the opportunity for the finance and accounting department, but it's more, what do we see tied to some of these roles and or functions as challenges and opportunities. So let's just kick that off with finance and accounting. So for me, after the end of the previous election, I certainly see a lot more budgets going into, hiring individuals, and we'll get into the HR side, but hiring individuals, upskilling individuals, and also retrofitting out of all things. I believe that with the previous supply chain issues, everyone was very eager to automate and to change things out. But as the election came onto the horizon, a lot of those budgets got pulled back. And so now in 2025, everyone is once again trying to replace older technology. It also seems that there's more obsolescence type of issues, at least with the customers that I'm talking with. And so there's simply more budgets allocated to replacing equipment that is either obsolete or not up to standards on the cybersecurity side, as more and more data and more connectivity is being put into some of those facilities. What are you seeing finance and or accounting wise, Dave?
Yeah, I think that I think it's interesting kind of where we have picked up to start on this because I feel like they are what most groups would call kind of cost centers. They are groups who are certainly needed and certainly important, but most people probably don't respect or appreciate them as much as necessary. I think you made some great points. I think that we will continue to see really good financial folks work on creative ways to go get projects capitalized, right? And I think that we will continue to need projects capitalized. It'll be interesting to see where we go interest rate wise versus inflation wise. It'll be interesting to see where we go when it comes to hiring and salaries. And I think all of those could put crunches on the bottom lines for lots of major organizations. And so I think all of those are great points. One of the points that I wanted to talk about was kind of raising capital, right? And so I think lots of large manufacturing companies probably are not going to be in the process of raising capital, but lots of even kind of medium sized organizations need to raise capital for new lines. They need to expand, they need to have working capital. We see lots of startups, lots of different groups coming in who are going through the process of, hey, I need X number of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in order to be successful. And so I think it's just a function of what I think it's a function of. It'll be interesting to see where we go and if it's possible for these organizations to raise money and if it's possible for these organizations to be successful, or if we're going to see lots of especially kind of these smaller startup organizations struggle even more in 2025 than what they did in 2024.
Let me ask you a question, right? So, when you say groups are raising capital, I've certainly seen an increase in groups who are bringing technical solutions for manufacturers
Mhm.
raise capital. But are you saying there's also groups looking to manufacturers, so end users raising capital in order to, I guess, bolster their operations that are like startups?
Yeah, so longtime listeners will know what, like 3-ish years ago, I spent a fair amount of time working for a mid-sized co-packers and brewery. I did a bunch of shows from their various conference rooms and locations, and they were in the process of a huge $80 million expansion, and all of that was, or maybe not all of that. My understanding is that at least the majority of that was debt, right? So some of it
Okay.
was outside money investors, lots of it was bank money. They had working capital loans. So yes, like even those guys in the 20 to $50 million a year range still needed to go out and take a ton of money in order to go buy new lines, in order to go build new buildings, in order to go expand. And so I think that we're at a point in which it's really difficult for small groups in order to be successful. Earlier this year, no, I guess earlier last year, we had Nate Call on. And Nate does a lot of work in beauty products and the FDA side and quality compliance. I thought it was a super interesting conversation. And he was saying something to the effect of that last year, the FDA instituted a series of guidelines that honestly, probably for the best of all of us, didn't allow you to go make beauty products in your garage or beauty products in your extra bedroom, right? You needed a location, you needed, kind of minimums. The ISO, I forget which ISO it was, but whatever the ISO qualification that historically had been like the gold standard now becomes the minimum, right? So when you go look at things like that, it goes through the process of, hey, we have to be so big. And that number might be $100,000. That number might be $20 million, but different groups have to have some amount of economy of scale in order to go be successful. And so I think we are seeing a push of lots of those small to small, medium sized groups being pushed to get larger so that they can be successful. And so when I talk about fundraising, I see, yes, there are startups. Yes, there are tech startups looking to go sell into manufacturing. But I think very much it's these small to medium sized groups who have generally been successful. But because of all of these outside factors, they're going to force to either get larger or go away.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, right? For a moment, I guess I wanted to clarify if it was debt versus equity financing, right? I think that
Yeah.
the tech companies will usually prefer equity financing versus the manufacturing companies will have to go the debt route, right? Because there's simply not as much ROI, and because there's simply a lot more money tied up in machinery and
Yeah.
lines and what have you, and operational costs. So I think that's
But I
important.
also mean, like, if you're a business, if you've been in business for 5 years, you can go to a real bank and go take a debt loan. And that in and of itself, if the business can go take a loan, is almost certainly better for the business than if you're going through the process of, excuse me, than if you're going through the process of going and selling equity, right? You're almost certainly not selling equity to the bank. You're almost certainly selling equity to
Right.
someone else. And if you're a $40 million company, you need $80 million in order to go expand. It's going to be a really tough sell.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Moving us further into the next section, which
Mm-hmm.
is human resources, right? And we touched a little
Yeah.
bit on the hiring side. I guess I'll give my perspective first. I think that there's still a lot of groups who are struggling to find the right individuals, right? And that's on the automation side, whether that's experts to be able to come in and do a lot of these either conversions, expansions, R&D projects, but also just pure maintenance, right? I think that there's just been a downsizing over the years in the market, and now there's simply not enough experts who can intelligently come in and service these types of production lines. And again, we can get into the specific platforms, but ultimately I just think that there's a lack of professionals. And I actually, on a side note, I did have a conversation on recruiting and upskilling and training people with Ann Wyatt,
Mm-hmm.
which should be launched in early February. But ultimately, I think that things will become worse before they get better. So I think that this year, a lot of groups are going to be trying to hire people. I think that salaries on the industrial automation side will go up. I think that many groups will struggle to attract talent, but ultimately, in maybe 3 to 5 years, once the programs catch up, once the universities catch up, there will be maybe a balance within the market. But at least, again, the companies that I'm talking to, almost every factory has an opening for a technician, an
Mm-hmm.
engineer, and then at the corporate level, a lot of them are trying to find global integrators. They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to find people to manage
Mm-hmm.
people. They're trying to find people who know IT and OT, because obviously everybody's working with databases and related technologies. So there's simply a lack of people at all those layers on the technical side, and of course on the management layers above them.
Absolutely, I'd agree, and I guess I would agree with the comments that you made. I guess just to kind of expand, I have seen all of those groups have been looking for people for, I feel, as long as I've been talking to them. So I don't know, 10 years, if not more. People have been looking for qualified groups, qualified individuals to provide these services, and man, I think it's just one of those. The people don't exist, right? At some point, you're just stealing from the person down the street, is how you're getting those people. And I think the more niche the need, the worse it is with not having enough people. So, as I said earlier, I do a lot of work on the ignition side. Um, we have not had qualified ignition people for as long as ignition has been around. Right? There are different ways that you can go about going and getting qualified in videos and inductive university and all of those other great things. But man, at the end of the day, you just need experience on the platform in order to be successful. And there just are not enough people in the world for the projects that there are. So, having said that, I think it'll be difficult. I think that's really where you're going to find groups who shine on the HR and hiring side, but also on the retention side, right? So, I worked. I worked at a kind of mid-sized company, and they had a person who worked second shift. Great guy. Literally went in because it was springtime, and he's like, "Hey, I'm making 15 bucks here. I could go make 20 bucks an hour running tree service stuff. I would much prefer to stay here, but I need to go make at least, $3 more an hour in order for that to make sense." And they let him walk, right? They let him walk over a relatively small number of dollars. And honestly, at the end of the day, letting someone who had been there for 6 months walk because of something like that is going to be more costly because you're not going to be able to find the person in order to come there to be successful, right? Like they already were missing people off those shifts, and so it's going to be it's going to be an expensive process of hiring and retaining people. We've talked a number of times about apprenticeship programs. I think in theory, medium term to long term, that could go solve some of our problems. But I think at the end of the day, you have to, HR people, management in general is going to have the opportunity to shine of, this is why you should come to work for us. We want you to want to come to work for us. This is why this is why you should stay with us. And I think we're going to see groups who become better than that at that and are forced to become better at that. And I think we're going to see groups who continue to be really bad at that and just continue to struggle to go find humans to go fill those positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And again, I think the comments go back to many conversations we've had, over the
Mhm.
last years. But ultimately, when you're looking for employment, whether you've just graduated or mid-career or late career, there's, I think, a lot of different alternatives. And the question then becomes for someone who's an expert at any of the ISA layers is, why should you go work at the manufacturer down the road versus, now bringing this back a little bit to the conference we're going to in February.
Mhm.
Google's now in manufacturing, which they have been for a while, but have expanded their practice. Dell has expanded their industrial automation practice, right? So there's quite a competition, I want to say, and quite a competition over the resources that
Mhm.
can deliver on the SCADA, MES, cloud, especially that are touching manufacturing, but ultimately also overlap with some of those companies. And I know people personally who have moved from manufacturing that requires for you to be on site every single day to a cloud provider who is again in manufacturing but allows you to work remotely, right? So to your point, HR departments will need to answer the question of, can we make this more attractive in whatever that way that may be, right? The remote versus in person is one area,
Mhm.
but there's multiple questions from a candidate standpoint.
Absolutely. I'll go take a crack at the next one that you have up,
Yep.
talking about sales and marketing. As I look at the state of sales and marketing, I feel like so much of it has become more and more impersonal. Maybe Vlad knew where this was going even before I knew where this was going. But I feel like so much of it has become impersonal, especially like during COVID times and post COVID times. Um, especially with and post COVID times. And so I think that we're going to see groups be more specific and be more personal when it comes to the sales and marketing, as opposed to just blasting into the spray and pray. I think we're going to have people who are more focused, and that doesn't necessarily have to all be um, human to human interaction. I think they that end users, that people want to know that you feel their pain. And so if you can go show them that you feel their pain, they're going to go give you the opportunity to help them. I think, but I do think we're going to go see more people kind of focused on the in person in 2025, which is how lots of kind of large deals have always historically closed. So I imagine that we will just continue to see more and more of that.
Very interesting. I actually have I guess, a very different thesis on the whole marketing and sales portion, right? And I will preface this again. I think we've talked on the other points when it comes to the user perspective. Here, I'm talking more about the marketing and sales of, I guess, like technical, maybe hardware and software for the end users versus, this is not a manufacturing company advertising their product, but more for the technical OEMs or solution providers are trying to sell into the end user. So my thesis is almost the opposite, right? So I think that on LinkedIn, you will often read that you need to be building a personal brand. And I think that that's very, how to say, like, it's centered in the belief based on the social media that celebrities have built, right? So if you look at any celebrity, they have a very big presence online, and that's because they had a pre-established brand to build off of, right? A lot of us and a lot of people in marketing and sales departments for OEMs or companies that create technical products do not necessarily have that, nor are they even required, in my opinion, to have it. I think that what people should be thinking about and looking at is what value can I provide to whoever I'm selling to? And as long as you can establish your credibility and your ability to solve a specific problem, that's when the decision to buy occurs. I really think that people buy from people they trust, and it is not based on their persona and or even personal life. It is mostly based on their ability to perceive the technical skills that that person has in solving the specific problem and or need. But I do agree that I think more granular approaches will certainly take place. I think that you can tailor your solution better to different groups. I've been in in conversations again without mentioning the specific group that has released a number of different tools, and ultimately the different tools on one side, let's say, compete with how a system integrator does things. On another tool or I guess solution competes with, how end user engineers in house are doing things. In another tool, they're competing against, hardware solutions currently sold by other OEMs. And so I think instead of just blasting all of that as a bundle, you need to really split that up into different funnels. And if you reach, for example, a maintenance manager, you're not going to talk about the benefits that only a system integrator would use, right? A maintenance manager will have a completely different problem than let's say, an engineering director in a systems integrator. So, anyways, I think that the point I'm trying to make here is that companies need to become better at showcasing the solution their product and or hardware or software provide versus, I think, building this personal brand. And I think the personal branding can come out of it, but ultimately it should not be the main focus of anyone looking to drive sales or marketing. And I actually have quite a bit of content coming out on that side, so I'll be, I guess, leveraging my decade of proven marketing or sales techniques, and showcasing what I think is best versus what's currently being sold to the industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I think that's interesting. I would agree. I think the more granular approach you can take if you've got 10 solutions. Going and talking to the 10 different groups at those 10 verticals are good. It's just much more difficult and time consuming. So I agree with that. Vlad, we are running up close to time. Do you want to pick one other group to talk about before we finish off this state of manufacturing section?
Um, let's see, I guess, how things progress. I'd like to definitely eliminate the legal and compliance, but I do want to talk about information technology or IT, because that's always a topic of discussion in my at least conversations and our circles. So, in terms of IT, right? So, I think we've made this comment a little bit earlier, which is number one, I think that more data is being, I want to say, absorbed out of plants, more data is being transformed, more data is being synthesized. And that means that IT is being put under more and more stress. Where I think this is a problem, right? What the challenge is that I'm seeing is that over the last decade or so, I think that most of the software industry has streamlined IT, but also outsourced a lot of the IT operations offshore, right? And I think that's a separate discussion, but I think what it's leading to is now most companies are running so lean on IT that there's just a struggle to number one, upskill those people, but number two, have them be able to process the right architectures. And again, I have tons of examples, but ultimately, they're simply struggling to create the right architectures that allow for a streamlined approach to, again, ingesting the data, storing the data, processing the data, and presenting the data, despite there being enough integrators being able to, let's say, use the tools like Ignition. You still need a layer or, I guess, a lot of involvement from IT to be able to get all of that done. So I think that's the challenge. Where do I see opportunities? Like I said, again, from the beginning of this conversation, I think upskilling IT on what OT truly means and have them understand where they stand, with regards to OT. Number two, obviously, I think every organization is looking for more people that can help in specifically manufacturing IT. And number three, I think it's just internal processes, right? So I like to simplify things with the people, process, and technology framework. I think process in business is very important, and I simply see groups taking one or the other extreme, which is either having too much guardrails to get anything done versus just not having enough guardrails, and then things become way too exposed or easy to break. So I think having a more rigorous process or less rigorous process, depending on where you stand, is extremely important. What are your thoughts on
Absolutely.
IT, Dave?
I think it'll be interesting. I think that um, I think that we will continue to see more and more IT needs, um, be it OT people who understand IT or IT people who take a larger role in the organization. So, with that, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think it remains to be seen who is going to make that step and who is going to bridge that gap. And I feel like we've been talking about it for 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, maybe more. All right, it was ITOT convergence. I feel like we're generally off the concept of ITOT convergence at the moment. I feel like it is a foregone conclusion. I think it's just the who moves up or who moves down in an organization, and I think it depends upon the organization, right? So I work with some organizations that the OT group takes over that networking stuff, at least on the OT side, and can have those conversations. Conversely, I work with some groups that it's the exact opposite, and it's the IT people who own the OT network and the OT
Yes.
data, and
Yep.
so much that would make everyone cringe. um
You know what I
so
find the common factor of like what that usually boils down to?
hmm.
I I think it usually boils down to whoever is more vocal at the top of those teams, right? So
Okay.
if the person on the IT side is, how to say it, overpowering the conversations, it would be OT leaning versus if the person that's leading the IT side, and again, it could be director or VP level,
Mhm.
and that's where it's going to lean. So, but I'm still confirming that psychological observation.
Okay. Yeah. Generally, I think that the people who are more vocal and are more willing to accept more responsibility are going to get more responsibility across the board.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year for IT. I feel very interesting year. Do we want to talk about operations,
Sure. Why
OT?
don't we talk about
Okay,
operations and say operations will be the last group that we'll talk about tonight?
let's do it. You want to kick us off?
I'll go. Yeah. So I think on the operation side, it'll be interesting, right? I think that we will. I think that at the end of the day, the operations group is the group who is in charge of making cases, and because they're in charge of making cases or widgets, they're the one that all of the things that we just talked about, it all comes crashing in to the operation side, right? Sales does a great job and we need to make 20% more widgets. Well, operations is the group who needs to go find a way to make 20% more widgets. HR or someone does a bad job, we are unable to staff appropriately. Operations is the team that has to go hold it together and go pay overtime or go figure out what that looks like in order to be successful on that side. So I think operations probably has one of the most toughest jobs because it's especially visible, right? If there is a mistake, everyone in the organization knows about it, right? I think the only thing that could be more visible than that is payroll doesn't get paid, right? Payroll doesn't get paid, everyone knows. Beyond that, we've got a quality issue, we've got some other issue. Everyone knows that operations has an issue or had an issue. Everyone knows that operations caused this problem. Line was down over the weekend because we had, super inexperienced operators. Everyone in the facility knows that the line was down over the weekend because we had super inexperienced operators and the operations staff gets called in. So I I don't know if 2025 will be more difficult for them or not because I think most years are difficult for those. Well, no, I think there are two groups. Groups that run really well and have historically run really well, and operations is doing fine and can take a breath. And then the rest of the groups that everything is just one dumpster fire after another, running and running and running. So yeah. So because of that, I think operations is in a tough position, and they always are, and probably always will be in a tough position.
I could not agree more. I like the way you put it. I think that there's not enough emphasis put on operations, and again, as I've mentioned, the more vocal individuals will usually take a higher importance in some of these conversations. But ultimately, operations is your main source, or I would almost dare say the only source of income for an end user, and ultimately in many of the other roles, right? I remember early in my career in an engineering team, I was told, and rightfully so, that we are essentially a support function for operations. Any projects that we do, whether that's increasing the speed of a line or increasing, the or reducing the changeover time, whatever, that would be in support to operations. So the more we can mix and minimize the downtime and increase their productivity, the better. But to not forget that ultimately operations are the ones responsible for paying for the engineering team's salary at the end of the day. So I think it's really important to recognize that. I really hope that to bring this back to this episode early conversation, we can have maybe some conversations with people on the operation side, whether that's again in maintenance, it could be directly on the plant floor, it could be supervising those individuals, and get some reality checks maybe in certain cases. And I can tell you for some of the companies I've worked in, you'd only have a 2-year rotation into operations because of simply how difficult and challenging it was. It was usually, you know, never 8 hours, at least 10 hours to 16-hour days to make sure things are running because it's 24/7, 365 in many instances. Definitely agree with what you're saying. It's going to be tough. It's always been tough. It's going to
Hmm.
continue to be.
Yeah.
I think only tougher for a number of reasons.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome, Vlad. What are your thoughts as we wrap up this first show of 2025?
I'm super excited, and I've told you this a little bit off stream. I've made quite a few plans for this year. I'm going to continue to refine, some of the projects I work on based on what interests me, but also what seems to be working better or in my favor. I'm certainly looking at exploring different opportunities. I think that my experience and education background lends myself to be able to do many different things, which is both a blessing and a curse. So we will see what this year brings, and hopefully settle on some interesting opportunities, challenges, projects, and or work.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree with what you're saying. Everyone, thanks for coming and hanging out with Vlad and I. Once again, this is Manufacturing Hub. If you guys are new here, well, not now because this is the end of the show. You guys can absolutely feel free to go ahead and throw comments and whatnot in the chat. We've had a ton of people watching us from basically the very beginning. You guys have been, well, either you guys have been quiet or our chat link has been broke once again, which would probably not be much of a surprise given our history on the chat link. We will be back, same time, same place, next Wednesday, 4 o'clock East Coast time, as we go have some more of these super fun conversations. We will almost certainly have a guest with us. If you guys have made it this far, make sure you're following Vlad, make sure you're following myself, make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub, make sure you guys do all those things like and subscribe. And if you've made it this far in podcast form, you're amazing. Please go do us like those awesome things like rate us 5 stars and follow along and all of those other things, because when I remember to tell you guys and Vlad remembers to publish the podcast episode on Thursday mornings, you guys listen, which is just absolutely